Jonathan, you are live.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Proptech Africa Association webinar. We're looking forward to engaging with you during the course of the next hour and a half, and we are really privileged to have a fantastic group of people, experts in their respective fields. I think, Murray, if you don't mind, please bring everybody in and I can introduce them.
Everyone, please turn on your cameras, please.
Good. So I'd like to welcome from India, Mr. John Kuravilla. He is the CEO of Brigade Real Estate Accelerator Program. Secondly, we've got Will Harris, the CEO of G Maven from Johannesburg. We have Jared Levin, all the way from Johannesburg. He's the account director for Cushman Wakefield Broll. And a big welcome to you, Teo Odunsi, you're the CEO of Northcourt Real Estate in Ghana. Big welcome to all of you, and thank you very much for giving up of your time and your valued input today. The purpose of today's conversation is around gadgets and data and knowing the difference, and why knowing the difference is so important. What we've understood here in Southern Africa and in East and West Africa is that property practitioners, people who are engaged in buying devices, monitor their properties, or are engaged in various elements and in the management of their properties, sometimes eliminate data and the understanding that they could or should have in respect to data in favor of buying a gadget, because it's easier to buy a gadget. It's easier to draft a scope of works and to create a tender document and to buy a gadget or a device or an IoT device, rather than actually understanding how to use the data that that emanates from all of these gadgets. And there's a lot of data that devices consume and emit. And as a result, the question has to be asked, is it a flaw in management that they don't understand why data is so important? So today's group of people are from their respective careers and in the industry, going to give a particular overview as to why gadgets and data are so important, and why it's important for you to know the difference between data and gadgets, and how do you actually apply them, and how do you actually implement good practice for the procurement of gadgets and the use of data in your portfolios. Having introduced the topic, having introduced the panelists, and having again welcomed you all to our webinar, I'd like to thank the API team and our own association team for having set this up. We're very happy that our webinar is reaching over 250 people, and we're thrilled to have you all on board. Murray will interrupt at some stage and will let us know how we can actually field questions from everywhere, wherever you are. So I'd like to open up the conversation. I'm going to raise the first question with you, Jared, if you don't mind. It's a question in respect to gadgets. The background to this is that it seems that most companies are comfortable buying gadgets, machines, and devices that compete and complete specific tasks. This is usually a facilities management and operations divisional decision. And the question that I'd like to ask you is, why are facilities management and operations managers more comfortable buying and using gadgets and devices? Over to you, Jared.
Thanks so much, Jonathan. Good afternoon, everybody. I think it's twofold, and I think it's not necessarily exclusive to facilities managers, facilities managers or the FM fraternity and the operations community. I think it's pretty pervasive across the corporate real estate community. But largely, I think on the one end, it's historical. So our entire profession, if you will, stems out of the growth of the then building manager. who over time grew in responsibility and grew with tasks that needed to be completed. And it was often a really constrained professional environment, usually with very little budget, and usually sort of operating reactively. And there was an opportunity there for, I suppose, gadgets or platforms of technology to try and aid that space. And then on the other hand, I think, or perhaps leading on from that, I think there is a very real reality where gadgets and platforms and technology come with a sales pitch. Usually there are teams trying to sell technologies, whereas data on the other hand is pervasive in its nature and exists in abundance in the real estate world, but it's very rarely harnessed. So in the real estate space, there are multiple components of data or ability to collect data. You know, I mean, we could think of the data potential lying in leasing data, in operational data, in life cycle data, in you know, each of the interplays between all of those components and the market data that we sometimes tap into as real estate professionals. But fundamentally, we're very, very rarely harnessing it, or seldomly are able to collect it. So across many real estate organizations, you know, across the country, I'd suggest across the continent, if not the world, currently the biggest data store is probably Excel spreadsheets, which is usable to an extent. And I know Will and his team wrote a really interesting article in the Asset magazine on exactly this topic around the availability of data, but the lack of its collection. So until we move into a space where we're able to get our data off of our desktops or our Excel spreadsheets and start cleaning it and collating it and storing it in a particular way, it becomes really difficult for us to actually harness the potential of it. And I think as a result of that, to circle back to your question, it's a completely unknown space for us generally as real estate professionals. It's not anything that we're yet familiar with on how to use and how to actually find the value. I mean, we often have discussions around data being the new gold, or the new oil, or whatever the case may be. But until we've actually gotten it into a usable form, it's actually pretty valueless. And I'd be interested in the opinions of my co-panelists. But I think to maybe circle back, it's twofold. I think historically our profession hasn't positioned itself or hasn't been positioned to use the data at that it is available to it. And then secondly, we're just not skilled and positioned to harness the potential as yet.
Okay. Anybody want to make a comment? I have a couple of, I do have a couple of riders to what you're saying, Jared, and I appreciate very much the sentiments. Would anybody like to make a comment in that, in respect to what Jared has said, please?
Mr. Yak, I think it'll be unfair of me to take the stage. I know this is something that's really close to your heart, so please have the floor and give us your opinions here. And I think the robust debate will start.
Okay, well, that's very gracious of you, Will. I think that the problem lies deep in the fact that, particularly in South African real estate, the training has always been around facilities management, which has orientated itself around mechanical, electrical, plumbing, high voltage air conditioning systems and those sorts of things. And very seldom has there been any at a low-level or operational management position in respect to the use of data. And data can be comprehensive. And then, of course, you have the micro-level data that is particularly associated with a particular device. And that's why we've put this panel together. We want to explore where lies the opportunity, where are the learnings for people who are already steeped in facilities management knowledge and experience. How do they get more learning? How do they get more training in applied data? And how do they have to go back to university? Are there particular courses? Or is there some opportunity for some of those suppliers to actually make sure that people understand the data utilization is equally as important as buying the device gadget in the first place? Panelists, comments, please.
If I may just chime in. Thank you, Jonathan, for setting this up.
Yes.
And I think Jared makes a good point that historically, as property people, we very, very keen on, the property specifics, and at best, we're considering the people within the space. But there is this third leg now that's, which is data that we need to understand and know how to manage, to be able to then obviously manage the property and the people within the property better. And you then say, do we have to go back to school and all of that? In my mind, one solution to this is collaboration. All right. Oftentimes, I find that those that have access to the data or own the data or can collect the data are not in the best position to either analyze the data or do some form of interpretation of the data. Case in point is some work that we did a few years back for a bank, whereby obviously they had a lot of information, on properties that, they had, collateralized all over Nigeria. And they had data, types of property, locations. It was very, very rich data, all right, good enough for us to do some very good macro, some econometric analysis with, but they weren't poised to be able to do that. These were bankers, all right, but they needed to do some kind of forecasting. And when we were called in, we had that skill set, to do that sort of forecasting and to help them understand where prices are going in the locations that they had previously financed. Also, for lots of retail players, like you rightly said, they've installed these IoT devices that can, track footfall and all this great stuff, and they're just pretty much using it for that. But you and I sitting on this panel can think of about 10 things that same data can potentially be used to do if we were only called into the room. So in my mind, I think collaboration is very key. Within my own team, we've scaled up to be able to do some great stuff, but at the same time, we still call in some, very good data analysts, that can do some machine learning end of the beat, to help use that data to give some very, very interesting information, information in quantitative manner. It doesn't even have to be qualitative all the time, because the data is that rich and it's already been collected by the developer or the investor, but they're just sitting on it. And once they're able to call other people in from a collaborative perspective, it then begins to be that gold that we talk about data being.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I wanted to ask the question a little bit differently to just broaden the scope of our conversation. And that is that, is the problem as easy as trying to solve the answer to the following question? Is it easier to buy a gadget or a device than it is to buy the interpretation of data? Jared?
Complex question, Jonathan. I think I would, to tie two questions together, I would suggest that collaboration is key. in sort of extending from what Teo was saying. So gadgets, in my view, gadgets or platforms are only going to be as useful as the data or insights coming into them and the ability to interpret the information that comes out on the other end. Simply just the black box, if you will. So typically, and speaking to that collaboration, and if you'll bear with me for a second, the typical sort of data use journey should follow, roughly the path I'm about to lay out is a process of data collection, very crucially then data cleaning, an element of data aggregation, and post-aggregation or warehousing, if you will, then a process or a component of data visualization or interpretation. And that final component, the visualization or interpretation, effectively the distilling of the data, I think that component is an opportunity for service providers or data science experts to collaborate with the real estate community to help us understand the world that we've been working in a bit better. So I wouldn't suggest, and certainly in my day job haven't been suggesting that real estate professionals should profess to be data scientists or understand data better than the data experts actually do. We understand real estate or facilities management, whichever case may be. But if we are to work with a professional team who are able to help us understand what our day-to-day operations are actually telling us, if we're able to have our data and our information sliced and diced in a different way than perhaps we've been doing it in the last 20, 30 years, that's where the value, I believe, would lie, and we're able to then offer a better service and a more efficient or effective service to our clients. And I think that unison and that unity right at the end is where the magic could proverbially happen.
Yeah. John, your view?
So, Jonathan, thank you for having me. I completely resonate with what Jared and Teo mentioned. We have a belief, and coming from a statistics background, we have a belief that what cannot be measured must never be invested in, whether it's time or money. That's point one. Point two, there's a lot of similarities between Africa and India and the way we consumers behave. In India, many years back, people used to ask for value for money. And today, that paradigm has shifted to money for value. And the value that one expects from the money that you're paying has to come from data.
Yes.
Which resides in those black boxes that Jared mentioned. And from that data must come actionable insights which have clearly defined outcomes. And we define that outcome as 3 letters, OI. If I spend a shilling on a device, what is the return on investment of that shilling that can only be detailed out or spelled out through the outcomes that data derives for us?
Yeah.
So I completely resonate with both Teo and Jared here that what cannot be measured, do not waste your time even thinking about it. On the other hand, today, with the cloud, with mobility, with data analytics engines inbuilt into many solutions, you don't need data scientists to actually get that out for you. There are companies who bring the data out for you, and your team has to decide how you want to use it to what outcome. So today, the devices come layered with data, with processing, with compute. You need to take the best decision on what is the value that your money is going to buy. And we have enough cases, Jonathan. I'll share it as we go along.
Lovely, thank you. That leads me to question 2, and this question is initially aimed The background to the question is, what is preventing a wholesome adoption and more absorption of data by real estate companies and property practitioners? And it seems to be due to the relative lack of skills and expertise in the industry, and that this surely limits their decision-making ability. So the question I'd like to ask Will and then the panelists is, in your view, what are the pain points being experienced in the industry in respect to using data? Will?
Excellent, John. Guys, thank you for having me. Good to be here. Good to be in touch with all of you. I'm going to answer this question, also attempt to touch on the really valid points in the previous question. Specifically, as we see it from our side, and again, I'm really open to the controversy here, because I think there's some really healthy debate. Our view, and again, I must preface that our background is very much at the practical coalface of data, and specifically in commercial real estate. Our view is that it's largely the fact that the pain that the industry is experiencing around data, and I think to define the pain, it's specifically, if I can lean on what Indian John said earlier, is that they're getting a really poor return on investment on their data. So that's the pain, and that's the obvious pain. But I think what are the causes of that? The first is that data is not reliable, and the quality of the data is not in a format that allows it to be reliable. So I think the sort of buzz phrase for that is junk in, junk out. That's the first pain point. And another pain point is that data is not in a format that's easily usable by commercial property professionals. So I think that's a cause of another pain point where people aren't getting value from the data, and there's a sense of frustration that there's all this information around. Jared certainly alluded to the ubiquity of data, and Tyra spoke to the richness of that information. Oftentimes, it's not in a format where it's consolidated and available for people to use it. A third pain point in data, and this is something that is a huge theme of ours, is in the modern age, it's almost, we're all familiar with this concept of the Industrial Revolution, where you have, where sort of in the year 1800, you had people who spend large portions of their time moving metal and cloth, effectively working as artisanal workers all day, every day. Fast forward to the 21st century, and have a look around at your colleagues in the commercial property space and in the residential property space. These guys are spending large amounts of their time, ourselves included, manually moving data around. And so that pain point relates to where humans are manually processing data, transforming it, pulling it, merging it, and these are all very manual processes. There's a lot of pain around it. It's a really poor deployment of high opportunity cost of time individuals being used as effectively artisanal workers on data. And the solution is obviously the ETL processes that exist, which can allow for that to be automated. And then I think another pain point, and it's a financial pain point, is a lot of guys have these aspirations to take advantage of database practices, and so they bring in industry outsiders to assist them. The challenge is you've got an industry outsider who is exceptional at data, but when that knowledge intersects with a really, really complicated domain, be it property, and specifically sort of the wheelhouse that most of us here are familiar with, commercial real estate, which is almost the premier leagues of when it comes to complexity and data, those guys often end up being less effective, or the person who's bringing in this vendor ends up spending a lot of their time having to educate these vendors on how data works, and often there's a lot of pain and inefficiency while those processes are ineffective. A final pain point, and it's something we've also seen a couple times, and certainly been guilty of historically, is a lot of the players in the technology space are familiar with a paradigm of transactional databases. So they'll build technology tools, software tools that are very good at putting information in and processing information. The challenge to the users of this data when they're engaging with the technologists is they're going, cool, you've done this thing, I want you to do other things, and the other things I need for you to do is to expose to me that data in a format that I can consume information of, that I can read information. And unfortunately, the same set of skills that people have, which allows for building really functional software, isn't a set of skills that allows for people to pull information out. So at a high level, and that is my view, those are the pain points that is being experienced. And I'd love to hear anybody else's, if anybody else would like to build on those pain points. And I think, all because we problem solvers at heart, I'd love for us to actually explore how we can address those pain points.
Well, first of all, Will, thank you. I think that you've explained the position so eloquently. Cliff Hocking, who's one of our participants, made the comment: we need to unpack the data and turn it into knowledge before it can be of any use at all. I think that's a very nice summary of what you've just said. Can I ask for further input in this particular point from John and Teo and Jared?
Sure, Jonathan, if I may. And I suppose I was waiting for the controversy there, Will, and it hadn't arrived. But I think I completely agree.
Give us time, Jared. Give us time.
I mean, there are a couple of sort of very, very basic elements. I believe. I think one, data in our world, in our professional world, is hugely fragmented. Not only within our own organizations or within our teams, across the industry, it's fragmented, and probably because there are a handful of service providers that have witnessed an opportunity to sell data, and I think on the one hand, there's these service providers that have crafted a niche for themselves to be able to sell the access to data and the interpretation of data in some senses. But then perhaps outside of that world, we've seen this access to data as being hugely competitive for some reason. And I'm not sure that it is anymore. Perhaps, extending from the point that Cliff had just made, in that access to data is very low value right now, unless you know what to do with it or how to interpret it, how to use it to your advantage. And that's the shift that I think we need to make. And perhaps, it's for a bout of controversy or controversy across the sector, obviously very generally speaking, I don't think as real estate professionals we know what to do with the data that we've got. I think this is a very new world for us. I think many of us behind the scenes are scrambling, trying to understand what it is that we need to do to best utilize the data that we've been collecting, perhaps unknowingly, for many decades now. And now we're in the position where we realize that there's a shift. A shift has happened around us, and we need to be part of the shift if we want to remain relevant. And we're trying to, amongst ourselves, all quietly, but I'm pretty sure everybody is trying to understand what to do next and who to collaborate with or who best to partner with, to really find value in the data that we've got and become the sort of quasi Google of the real estate worlds.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
we're doing some polls, so just in case, Murray and I were doing some polls. So if you see me typing, it's not me typing a letter, not me ordering some pizza later. I'm putting a poll together, and the first question that we've asked our participants is: as a property practitioner, do you fully understand how to use the data that arises from your usual day-to-day use? So, and I can see the results on screen. It's actually quite illuminating. We'll share the results of these poll questions at the end of the session. So thank you very much for participating. But I think I heard, John, you were going to make a contribution to this question.
Yeah. So, Jonathan, I have an analogy to make here. A knife in the hands of a child can be a weapon for self-inflicting wounds. In the hands of a skilled chef, can create masterpieces. And in the wrong hands, can be misused to create havoc. Data is exactly that knife. You need skilled people. You need a skilled chef to actually convert that data into knowledge, into actionable insights, and then deliver outcomes. Data in the wrong hands can actually do more damage than good for you. So just adding to what Jared was saying, and to Will's thing of bringing some controversy, I think data is like that knife.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Absolutely, John. Absolutely. And just to chime in, I would also use an analogy, and just in agreement with the comment that was made by the participants about turning data into knowledge. And what comes to mind is this image that I saw. I think it was in a book that I read of this guy riding a bike. All right, he's riding a bicycle, but the only problem is he's trying very hard to move because his tires are squares. They are not circular. All right, and he's trying, and there's this image, and there's this other guy coming with these tires that are circular, and he says, "May I suggest?" And the guy riding the bike says, "I'm too busy." All right, now this is the case with a lot of players in the development and investment space, the real estate development and investment space. And there's lots of data that can show them how to make better returns, how to make, how to bring about more sustainable real estate, and how to price them. All right. But in that space, there's a lot of doing things the old how. Right. And what often happens is you find a lot of players who will prefer to copy other players that are doing things, research backed, and it's working for them. And instead of doing their own research and, using their own data to inform their own decisions, they'll rather just copy that person that is getting it right. And that's the vicious cycle that, that we find, especially in the West African context. There's so much data that is readily available, that can tell us, that can bring about better, efficient ways of managing and bringing to birth projects. But just riding on that bike with the square tires.
Yeah. I want to bring a particular question from Kenneth. He asks, what are the most important data points that property managers need that may make them adapt a data management platform? What is your view? Will, Jared?
I think perhaps learning from very recent experience and having witnessed the havoc, if you will, that's played out in the property management space in South Africa, at least over the last sort of 12 to 18 months, the ability to start trending and the ability to start predicting shocks to the system becomes really, really powerful. And I think the property management fraternity or outfit or team that manages to start using all their historical data as well as current data outside of just the real estate world, and I'll build on that in a second, will be a force to be reckoned with. So if we were for a second to imagine a world where property managers or property management companies were able to overlay the operational patterns happening within their clients' portfolios and overlay that with micro and macroeconomic data, and sort of very similar to the way Clem Sunter used to do in flagging certain scenarios that may play out in the future. If we were to be able to start predicting what may happen and then readying ourselves for these shocks, I think it becomes hugely valuable. Rather than staying in the world where we are right now, where we're We're trying to remedy mishaps on a day-to-day basis and collect rental and follow up on debtors and make sure that accounts are issued, etc., and finding efficient ways to do that. I think that sort of has its space, and it's something we need to get right. We need to buy our time back administratively in the property management space, but I think that's only one piece of the coin. I think the ability to change the game fundamentally and start advising our clients on what may come and what they need to start preparing for, perhaps a bit of an asset management lens, if you will, sort of within the property management space. I think that starts becoming really, really valuable.
Guys, thank you, Jared. Would you mind? Yeah, my view, and perhaps, I mean, I love the picture that Jared paints around diagnostic analytics and predictive analytics. My view, and I must say that Jared comes from a business that does run in-house software that they've built that's particularly good, but we've seen in the industry generally that there's quite a challenge in just simple reporting. So it's really exciting to talk about the cool stuff down the line, but our view, what we see is people to answer the question, what's important data points that property managers need. There a lot of value would simply be created if all that reporting and that admin of putting and reporting information together could be shared with decision makers. And that's my view. Is we so early on in the process, where if you can just get that piece right, it'll create a bunch more capacity where people can actually lift their heads up and do the cool stuff. So that's my perspective. It may be controversial, but that's my view. As we're really early on in the cycle.
Well, you know, listening to all of you, my view is perhaps informed by a little bit of practical experience. I'm not a data scientist by any manner of means. I just kind of know how to link the eyes and the ears and the grey things that stick in between, and I use the mouth in the same proportion that it was intended. You know, the issue though is that I think that for most property practitioners, they are more adept at understanding how to use a device or a gadget, because that's what they've trained, that's what they've been exposed to. Whereas data does call for another kind of skill, and it's a skill that is a cognitive skill. It's the skill that's based upon observation. That if you know, I was confronted a long time ago when I had the privilege of opening Monthly Square in Bangalore, where we were asked by the owner, do I spend $500,000 on a very, very expensive camera-based footprint system, or do we do a proof of concept and just get the security guards to do a little clicker test? So interestingly enough, I went with the clicker test, and that actually proved to be just as good. But it was within a year that we ended up buying the camera-based foot count system, which also had a command control function. We were able to update our entire command control, our foot counting, our security system. So we were a heck of a lot more informed. I have a funny suspicion that not enough of our wonderful property practitioners spend enough time in kicking bricks and walking around, listening from a corporate real estate point of view.
Guys, I can hear Jonathan's breaking up there, but if I'm just going to build on from what Jonathan's saying, I don't know if you guys got that, but Jonathan's view is that he doesn't feel that commercial property professionals spend enough time walking the bricks and understanding that the assets that they're managing. And Jonathan, if I may hijack your point, while you're
making it very well. Thank you, Will.
Awesome. I'd love to build on something that one of our attendees, Dean Robinson, has raised, and it also touches on an earlier point that Jared has raised, which I've been wanting to talk about the whole time. Is Jared spoke about the driver for software, for data being driven by incentives, and there's more incentive to sell a gadget, and the sales teams are more sophisticated than potentially service providers who are looking to sell consulting hours in extracting value from data. So that sort of that flow that Jared started moves inevitably, I feel, into the world of incentives and into people having access to information. And Dean's point here, where solutions providers and this also talks to another point raised by Jared, was where information, these data silos aren't opened and they're not made integration friendly, so that when decision makers need to use their data, it's very difficult to aggregate all that information from all those various sources into one environment that's going to drive improved decision making. So to talk to Jonathan's pain, where he feels certainly people aren't identifying those insights and pulling that rich information out, a view that I'm prepared to make is that, whether intentionally or otherwise, that information isn't available in a format, i.e. sitting all together, mashed up and usable for decision makers to derive value from it, and that's retarding the ability for people to get the value, which will create the sort of white papers or case studies to drive the ROE, to get that data analytics flywheel working. So I hope it's been useful what I've just said. But that's my view, and I'm going to underline all of it with the fact that professionals right now spend so much time doing that unglamorous stuff relating to data, and Indian John, it could be completely different in India, but certainly in large parts of the African context, people spend so much time manually processing information, they don't even have the luxury of looking at deriving more value from information, and they also don't have access to information.
In fact, Will,
over to you guys.
just to add to your point, Will, just to add to your point, we must first learn to walk and then run. And data is exactly that. I mean, 5 years back when we started Brigade Reap, none of the real estate developers would want to talk to our startups who came with devices and data, because the people at the developers end didn't know what to do with the data. So we actually forced our startups to go with solutions which only does one of two things. Either tell a real estate developer, listen, I will help you save 22% of your costs, or I will help you make 34% more revenue. There is nothing like money that talks. And data can actually convert to money. And I'll give you an example, Will, and Jonathan talked of Monthly Square. We had a startup which went to real estate developers and said, you have hundreds and millions of square feet of buildings under development. The current practice is a site engineer takes the information on a sheet of paper. He then goes to a site office, opens his computer, inputs data into an Excel sheet, and then passes it to somebody else sitting. And that process was taking between 3 to 4 hours of a site engineer's time. And this company came to us and said, listen, I will use the mobile phone of every employee worker on site. And they created an app where the data from the mobile phone of every user on site actually plugged into the cloud. Now, the problem was most of the sites did not have network connectivity. So we got the startup to actually build an interface where the minute the mobile phone senses data, it gets uploaded to cloud. And boom, the real estate developers suddenly started seeing real-time data, which helped them reduce delays, which helped them optimize when to bring in inventory and also manpower.
Yeah. And it's simple maths. Sorry, John. It's simple maths, John, to say this site manager or this person who you're paying, let's say $100 a day, and if you do the maths and you will figure out that he's spending 4 days a month doing this manual work, there's automatically a business case. It's $400 on the table if you can eliminate that work, and he can then, or she can then deploy that time more productively. So I love that point around just starting with one win and demonstrating the value of data and demonstrating the value of efficiency.
Yeah. I'd like to move, thank you very much, everybody. I'd like to move the conversation on a little bit because it's such a privilege to have Theo from West Africa and John from India. So I want to open up the discussion a little bit more in respect to the transference of technology and how to use data within what we broadly say are complex markets, markets that are particularly Indian and African, markets that are not as regimented and as settled as those that you'll find in Australia and in Europe. And I'm of the view that when I say complex markets, I mean the exciting markets, the markets that we'd all like to be in. So my question, John, to you is that it seems that just won't work in these markets. The question to you and for discussion with the panelists is, where feasible, can all technology and innovation be transformed and transferred and applied in complex markets like in Africa and in India? John.
So Jonathan, the answer is very simple. We see it around us. Cisco, which is solutions from the US, actually has applications that work across markets. Microsoft, with its applications developed in the US, applies across the world. India and Africa are very similar. Both are, highly fragmented, highly unregulated real estate markets. And the pain points of a real estate commercial developer or a residential developer in Africa, in Tanzania, in Nairobi, in Johannesburg, is identical to the problems and challenges faced by a real estate developer in Bangalore, Mumbai, or Delhi. The only difference is the nuances of the data that may be relevant to somebody in Tanzania vis-a-vis somebody here in Bangalore. And let me give you a case in point. We have a company called WeGot. WeGot stands for Water, Electricity, Gas or Things. They came with a sensor which monitored water leaks in buildings. And they were very excited with this concept. And we said, this will not work. And they said, why? And we said, this is not going to work anywhere in the world because, Jonathan, we got them to present to the Proptech Africa Association a year back. And the reasons were identical. Nobody wants to know how much water is leaking. Can you tell me, can I save that leak? A. B is, in India, there are 5 different sources of water. There is borewell water, there's rain harvesting water, there is sewage treatment plant water, there is tanker water, and there is corporation water. The quality of water from each of these sources is very different, and it'll be identical in Africa. So we told WeGot, you have to not only monitor water leakage, you have to monitor quality of water from each source, and you have to help me through notifications on how to conserve water. That startup, which had 1,000 sensors deployed 2 years back in India, today has deployed 70,000 sensors. And the second challenge was, so we got the product story right. The other story was the fact that they used to go to a real estate developer and say, listen, I'm going to charge you $200 to install the sensor for a 2-bedroom apartment. And the builder turned on and said, listen, I'm going to hand over this property to the Resident Welfare Association in 2 years. I'm not going to spend $200 to wire one apartment. So we sat with the real estate, the technology company and said, bring your bill of materials down. And from $150, the bill of material we brought down to $90. And we then created water as a service. We told the real estate developer, listen, we will charge you $2 a month per apartment. And when you hand it over to the Resident Welfare Association, the RWA pays us $2 a month. So not only did we completely rejig the product, which was the device, we also got in different data sets from different sources of water, and we completely tweaked the business model. And this model will work in Johannesburg, will work in Tanzania, will work in Nairobi, will work in Bangalore, will work in any part of the world.
Yeah.
So the challenges are the same. You have to just take a view on how do I deliver a return on investment to my developer community.
Well, I just want to make, before I open this up for further conversation, John, I think that a lot of people who are participating in this webinar would be very, very interested to know more about a lot of the that have come through the Brigade REAP. So if you'd be prepared to add a little cameos on each, I'll make sure that everybody gets that and exposes them to it. I think, this is meant to be a broad business opportunity for everybody, and I think it's also opportunity. And if there's a problem that that everybody thinks is an Indian problem, it's probably also an African problem. And if it can be solved, then that's fantastic, especially if it saves water. Fantastic. Teo, Will, Jared, can you comment? Gentlemen?
I see Teo's wanting to give it a go, but Teo, you seem like you're on mute.
Oh,
Yeah.
Sorry. I didn't realize I was on mute.
Very good. Yeah. Sorry, Teo. Yeah.
Okay, so I was saying fantastic comments by John, which absolutely highlights how, a solution that could be created, in the US or wherever can then be adapted, for local patronage. But another thing that I found that technology and Proptech in particular does in the African context is to correct policy. All right. A lot of things that are taken for granted, in the UK, in the US, that don't work, in Africa. Sometimes technology can solve that. Case in point is a solution that we have: rent small. All right. In the UK, you pay your rent monthly. If you actually earn your revenue weekly, you could speak to your landlord and potentially, pay your rent weekly. But in Nigeria, Ghana, you would pay your rent annually. All right. In some cases, you'll be asked to pay your rent 2 years in advance. And guys, that doesn't mean you get your salary a year in advance either. You still, your revenue is still monthly. It's just that the landlord expects you to cough out your rent annually. Which is a big mismatch. And in a lot of times, houses that people can ordinarily afford, if they were being charged monthly, they can't access it because the rent is now annually, and that just creates a lot of problems. So there was this solution we created, like I said, rent small, which essentially just takes up those annual leases and slices them into monthly leases, and actually doesn't sell leases, it then sells licenses, because again, there's a lot of policy problems with leases. You can't kick a tenant out that is on an annual lease until 6 months later, so he could potentially leave with 18 months of rent or free rent, and there are just so many complications. So essentially highlighting my point that sometimes solutions can solve policy problems, and this sort of solution was birthed in the place of just reading the data, understanding what the pain points are, like that was highlighted earlier, and then finding some sort of platform that can solve that, because some of the challenges with selling monthly licenses is the ability to get repayment. Would there be a lot of delinquency? The operational side of having to request for rents, on a monthly basis and all that. But that's what the technology solves. It's just on a platform. Direct debits. Very. Using AI to do some profiling for the potential tenants, and all those sorts of stuff at the back end, insurance, and all of that just being mashed up into that solution, and then solving significant policy problems that are not prevalent in more developed countries, but are the case in Africa. All right.
Yeah, Taya, I think that we take a lot for granted from the rest of the world. I beg your pardon. I think the rest of the world takes a lot for granted about us in complex markets. I think that we are at the cutting edge of providing solutions to problems that a lot of people in Europe and Australia and America don't even know about. I would love to start opening this debate up for our colleagues in South America as well, because I'm sure that they've got the same challenges that we have. I think, though, that transference of technology is exceptionally important. And in my own personal space, have been involved in the application of technology that is extremely advanced and being applied in a more broader complex market environment. And by way of example, I can think of water from air, the whole principle of developing a solar power system, reducing the temperature of air coming system, attracting water from the air, seemingly from nothing, I think has proved to be a particularly African solution to a worldwide water shortage challenge. So I think that we've got a lot to do. We've got a lot of work to do, but I also think that we have a lot to offer in our complex market environments. I have a particular question for you, Taya, being in West Africa. And that is that, much can be learned from complex markets. In your view, what are the similarities and where lie the learnings arising from our conversation about the transference of technology? Can you share ideas in your market that are gaining market share?
Yeah. Transference. I mean, you want to rent a property in the UK, in the US. You just jump on Zoopla, Halifax, and all those marketing platforms. That's something that has seen a lot of traction and has really helped to make African real estate markets much more transparent. Back in the day, say 10 years ago, I could charge whatever for a house, and someone that's just flown into the country might not have any reference point, absolutely no reference point to know what pricing are. And obviously this is technology that was transferred from multi-listing sites, that in more developed markets, and they're making them more prevalent in African markets. Obviously, there are still. I was in Gabon a few months ago, and I was surprised to find that there is no very well developed multi-listing sites that you could just check up property prices and find. So there's still a lot of room for growth. Even the ones that exist in Nigeria, Ghana, there are challenges again that are prevalent with our environment that the operators are battling with. But that's one case of transference of information and technology to African markets, and that has really helped to make the markets much more transparent and operationally effective. We've obviously talked about adaptations of IoT in commercial real estate. That's becoming very, very prevalent. This was information that landlords struggled with previously, especially from like a retail hospitality perspective. Just understanding their books, their footfall. What works, what doesn't work, what are things that are interesting to people in an hospitality perspective. What games are people playing? What are things that are driving engagement those spaces, but obviously these devices, and that's why Jonathan, that's why the developers like the devices. These devices have helped them to easily be able to see really what's working, and you just get this one pager report and you can just see the pie chart showing where what stands are getting more engagement and what stands are not getting engagement, and obviously that's some transference of technology into our markets.
Yeah. Tell me, Taya, in your particular area where you live, is bandwidth, data cost, accessibility to connectivity a big issue?
Yes, it is. Yes, we still don't have contracts. I'm currently in the UK, and I mean, I pay a fraction of what I pay when I'm in Lagos on a monthly basis as a contract, and it's just there. I roll it over every month when I'm here. But in Nigeria or when I'm in Ghana, I have to do more of your pay as you go. So it's slightly more expensive. People think about these things much more than, you probably don't think about your data costs, in South Africa, or if you're in the US or thereabouts. So it's still slightly expensive. It's still a little bit out of reach. Why I'm economical is that we're just glad it's even available, there is some investment in infrastructure to make it even better in terms of bandwidth and what have you.
John, from an Indian point of view, of course, data cost, accessibility to data, connectivity, bandwidth is actually not a problem at all. And in actual fact, in your neck of the woods in Bangalore, data costs are some of the lowest in the world. Would you agree that that is what is promoting so much innovation in India?
So Jonathan, good point that Theo made. India 6 years back was a very, very expensive mobile data market, very expensive. Then then came the world's largest startup, Jio, and it completely revolutionized bandwidth, accessibility, and costs.
Yeah.
And everybody thought that Jio was actually going to take on the giants and bleed to death. But today, and the similarity between Africa and India is that Africa is a mass market. India is a mass market. Jio understood the game. It's today one of the only profitable telecom networks in the country, despite having the lowest costs and providing data, good data at affordable rates. And that has actually created an explosion in the smaller markets across India. And when you have all-inclusive development and the growth is coming from smaller markets, Africa is no different. I think you need one telecom player who will completely disrupt the traditional dinosaurs sitting there and actually make Africa a very vibrant and robust, not just a Proptech market, but a digital market.
Yeah, sorry. Let me just chime into that. John, you're absolutely right to create those similarities between Africa and India. But the big problem is when Jio just needed to convince one prime minister, or one communications, commission, a Jio trying to come into Africa would need to convince 60 very divergent prime ministers or presidents or commissions. So that fragmentation of that big market into very tiny, that's why from a Northcote perspective, we operate across West Africa, because operating in Nigeria alone would definitely be too small, and because really it should really be essentially one country, right? It's those markets have just been fragmented, and that's where the challenges happen, and these are very politically charged, countries with divergent perspectives, and that's the challenge that startups are trying to revolutionize this market have coming in. I just thought to add that.
But Theo, I'll just disagree there. India is actually 20 countries, because the Chief Minister of Karnataka, if he's not from the ruling government, will actually be detrimental to everybody else. And there were different governments in different parts of India, and Jio actually faced those challenges. And let me give you an example of Kenya. You have two large telecom players. You have Safaricom and you have Airtel. And both are holding ARPUs common. And both have, they've got what, a 30% penetration into Kenya. If one of the two blinks and drops prices, let me tell you, they will run full sweep competition out of the market. Or you need a smarter guy coming in. So you need to start someplace and the rest of the world will emulate.
Yeah.
So you have to start somewhere.
I want to give you an example of what Jio did in all. The average cost level, and it was already inexpensive by South African and African standards. What Jio did was it came in and it made it so much more inexpensive. It meant that in one of my shopping centers in Surat on the west coast north of Mumbai, instead of running a tracker system using Bluetooth, I actually had a geo chip in every single one of the trackers. It was so inexpensive that I used a geo cell phone connection to run a tracker system for about 60 of these things in the shopping center. And can you imagine if all of these IoT, if every single one of these internet connected devices actually had a network chip that meant that you had the integrity of data, you had the collection of data, you didn't have to hassle with ons and offs and all of the innovative and how much further and how much more we would be able to do. Jared,
Jonathan,
Will?
Yeah, perhaps exactly on that point. So firstly, I suppose this notion of complexity is perplexing me a little bit, because I would argue that South Africa is a hugely complex market for us to work in. But that being said, I think this notion of complexity is actually a people problem rather than a real estate problem. And perhaps by extension, real estate, whether it's buildings that we live in, work in, play in, get schooled in, shop in, only exist for us as people and whatever our uses are. So I would suggest that the acceleration of this transference of technology and information and knowledge sharing that I think you're hinting at is hinged on a common will, on our willingness to want to change and do differently. But more often than not, we hinder ourselves either politically or competitively or economically, which, and each of the co-panelists have touched on this in a different way. And I think it just needs a subtle shift in how we approach where we want to go. Perhaps a really good example of, perhaps by the definition we might have been creating here, of a complex market that's not so complex anymore in Africa is Rwanda. Rwanda 6-7 years ago was a very difficult place to, never mind work in, just live in. But right now, it's probably one of the better, if not coming towards being the most efficient tech hubs on the continent. And that's as a function of there being really low barriers to entry for startups. There are tax incentives for new businesses to come into the country. Generally, and I suppose it's just a predisposition, but there's a really young population in Rwanda who are just really eager to adopt technology to solve the problems that they have, and all these things coming together provides this common will to do differently and leapfrog where they were. And I think there's a big learning in that.
Yeah, I think that we certainly can consider the universality of data management and connectivity. It's a great empowerer of productivity and innovation. Teo, welcome back. From your neck of the woods, it seems that both you and John, although you're literally poles apart at the you agree that there are issues, but these are surmountable challenges. Would you agree?
You broke off a bit, so I didn't quite get the entire point. Jared, did you get it?
I was just saying that.
Tayo, I got bits of it. I think what Jonathan was saying is, even though you and John Caravello are so far apart geographically, there seems to be a lot of commonality in the way you guys see things, and the fact that you have, despite the idiosyncrasies of different countries, you seem to have overcome those challenges in country, despite the fact that there are these challenges locally. I think Mr. Yak was interested in your thoughts on that, or if you just wanted to build on that. John, I hope I got that.
Thank you. Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't think Teo can hear.
Guys, would you mind if I stepped in, please?
Yes, please.
Access signals. Guys, I would love this question which you asked, John, which is, can all technology and innovation be transformed and applied in complex markets like Africa and India? I would love to have a separate session, because everything's the default assumption here is that things are really easy if the markets are homogenous, and then the complexity arises where there are idiosyncrasies and subtleties and nuances, and the markets all of a sudden that makes markets non-homogeneous, whether it's political issues, whether it's different data structures, whether it's different processes or even legal issues coming down the pipe. And I'd love to really, in order to address that question, to have a session around just what are the different political, legal, process aspects across all these different geographies, and how different are they and how similar are they? I think it's a hugely interesting question to ask, and I'd love to have the inputs of guys like John from India, who says we all think India is simple because it's one country, but as John said, it's actually 20 countries. I'm presuming that's linked to the states. It's insightful to hear about how in Africa you've got this concept of 2-year leases with a whole bunch of legal protection afforded to the tenants. I find that really, I think that's fascinating. It's an incredible question and a very deep question.
In fact,
Yeah.
Will,
So
I'd like
much
to
unknown.
add something here. Yeah, good point you raised. But let me tell you a simple bridge that can be created, and we are doing that with Europe for Proptech in India. Many disruptive startups from India are keen to solve similar issues in Africa. You need disruptive young startups from Africa who say, listen, we'll take the technology that you guys bring in, we will tweak it, we understand this market well, and we'll create a win-win partnership where we understand the lay of the land, we understand the nuances of Africa and its legality, you guys understand technology, the challenges are similar, let's work together. And I'm doing this as we speak, Will, with 2 companies, one from Netherlands and one from France, who's got technology that our country has not seen. They just don't understand India and the legalities and the complexities of India. They come from France and Netherlands, which are very simple markets to deal in. And we are creating that landing pad for these 2 companies to come into India. So in as much the same way as we are taking the complexity of India and making it simple for companies from Europe, I think if disruptive startups from Africa can do the same for Indian, and Indian technology is as good as the best in the world and cheaper. So it'll resonate well with the African market.
Yeah.
That's a great
John,
idea.
you've always said that. Yeah, John, you've always said that. If I can just let everybody know that one thing that is very appropriate to the work that John is doing is in his real estate accelerator program, all of your cohorts, all of your candidate startups, when they come in, get asked 4 questions. Question 1, can you be, in no particular order, how sustainable is your business? Number 2, how relevant is it? How relevant is your product or your business to solving a particular problem? Can your business, can your product be commercialized? And finally, how scalable is your product? And I can't help thinking that those 4 simple questions have such relevance in the complexity of doing business in Africa, because it will help our Proptechs, it will help our investors to be more aligned and certainly to be more focused in respect to what challenges they have and satisfying their objectives. John, Taya?
Yep. Absolutely.
Okay.
And Jonathan, we ask one more question to the startups who are mature. How globally relevant is your product? So companies who are solving water, SP, waste, electricity,
Yes.
energy, and air are today ready to go overseas. In fact, we took some of our startups to the Middle East, and we were surprised that the government there actually saw value in what some of our startups are doing. So I think this global village we live in, while it may have complexities, if you build that bridge with local expertise and local talent with global technology, I think it's a bridge not too far.
Yeah,
sorry about the world's getting smaller and smaller.
Yeah, sorry about my network earlier. And fantastic work you are doing in India, John, and I definitely will be reaching out. And I can imagine we're about rounding off, and it will be important for me to highlight something that I discovered is happening on the continent. Proptech and adaptation of technology to real estate in general was a big laggard pre-2020, pre-COVID, right? A lot of developers, investors, even people in the management side of things just thought there was no point listening technology to do their work. A lot of them thought it would take some of their jobs. They thought it will make their costs skyrocket. I mean, just like the analogy I gave earlier, they were just riding on that square, wheeled bicycle. But what happened during COVID is, because there were lockdowns and all of that, a lot of them started to leverage some form of technology or the other, first to communicate. And then they said, this thing is working. Can we adapt technology to other sides of our business? And that absolutely is opening up new frontiers that, as a player and an advocate for about 6-7 years now, it's very, very surprising the way some people are very, very keen to listen to conversations on adapting, even, high tech, for real estate. And I just thought to highlight that to this panel and also, to our participants, that I think this is a very good time, to bring in, those solutions, those ideas. Some of them may be transferred, from our other clients. Some of them may be developed locally to solve absolutely local problems. But this is the time, really, from my own perspective. And, there's a bunch of us, in Nigeria. There's a Nigeria Proptech Association, bunch of great guys, doing a lot of stuff, raising funds, getting into accelerator programs like the one John is running, and in the US, and just doing great stuff, trying to solve, very pertinent problems.
Thank you, Teo. I'm reminded that we have a ticking clock in the background. So, and I think that we've covered all the questions in the participants area. I'm going to ask, I'm going to start with you, Jared, for some closing comments, if you don't mind. Jared, Will, John, Teo, and then I'll close our webinar session. Jared, please.
Sure, thank you, and I think Teo led us into it nicely. I think in closing, the opportunity for us as a real estate sector, locally, across the continent, globally, is huge. I think we're operating in a market that traditionally has been very slow to move, and I think we haven't yet sort of seen the closing of the window for first movers. So I think any providers wanting to come into the space, any current sort of players in our real estate sectors who are willing to take the leap and do things a little bit differently, without losing sight of, to pick up on Will's comment earlier, without losing sight of still getting the basics right. I think, there's tremendous opportunity to add more value and to do better business. So to our participants, to all of you, in whichever way you're considering a shift in the space or an adoption of technology or a use of data, now is exactly the right time.
Good point. Will? Will?
Here we go, second time lucky. I love Jared's point. And I think it just touches on the value of collaboration, which Tara raised earlier. It's really exciting to be in a space where we're in Africa, we're chatting with John from India, we're identifying we've got more in common than we don't. And I think platforms like this, which allow ideas to be passed around, there's been incredible feedback from the attendees here. These are really wonderful insights. Is only going to be good for us as an industry, and is only going to help us to rise. Just to build on what Jared said, though, certainly the first couple of white white paper case studies which demonstrate clear value, I think will generate more and more momentum. And the sooner those are bedded down and the sooner those are sold to the industry, I feel confident that it's going to drive more innovation, it's going to push more investment, and it's going to lead to greater adoption by potentially the guys who are sitting with the purses, who are on the fence, who may be a bit doubtful of the value of data. So yeah, as I think has been said before, we certainly, there's no people who control the market yet. These are exciting blue oceans for us to attack, and we must just move aggressively and solve problems. All common sense stuff, but it's all about the execution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Will. John?
Yep. So thank you. The more I attend webinars from Africa, the more I see in common. But I'd like to just add that markets are as complex anywhere in the world. The nature and degrees of complexity will vary. But the foundation for any business is profitability, and a benchmark of profitability is the ROI that can be delivered by any business. Data and devices, because the topic is that, will help deliver that. And I believe, because we are two continents apart, sometimes it's best not to reinvent the wheel. Collaborations, bases, strengths can actually make things much easier for defragmenting these complex markets. Thank you, John. Thank you for having me.
Theo?
It's been great sharing thoughts with this very bright gentleman on data and devices for real estate. And as we round off, I'd just like to highlight one very critical sort of data that I find is often overlooked, which is transactional data. And when I talk about transactional data, I don't mean just prices. I mean the data that any real estate player comes across in his day-to-day, in her day-to-day transacting in property. I find, like Will said earlier, this data is either not collected. If it's collected, it's not collected in the right format, and then it can't be useful. I just want to highlight how you are sitting on a gold mine, or literally you're not sitting on it because you're letting it just flow away. I'd just like to highlight the importance of collecting this data on day-to-day. It definitely will help your business, the businesses of your clients, and those that you represent, and just essentially make the ecosystem much more better.
Thank you very much, Taya. I'd like to conclude, firstly, by just quickly reviewing the poll results. How to use the data that arises from your usual day-to-day use. It looks like it's a fair split between yeses and nos. The second question is, when you tender and you buy gadgets and devices, do you include an assessment of the data that is being captured? Exactly 50%. This third question was, do ESG considerations affect your real estate management decision making? And most people said yes. And the final question was, do you think that CRE clients are enjoying the best from their CRE managers in respect to data utilization and space optimization? And unfortunately, most people thought no. I'm thinking that data has a particular value, and I think that the purpose of this webinar was to explode the myth that gadgets, the subject of this conversation is gadgets or data. I think the subject of this conversation today has been quintessentially subject is important. From today is that there's a lot of opportunity for people to be reskilled and for people to understand how to use data better. So I would like to say thank you very, very much to everybody. I'd like to thank all those who participated. I'd like to thank Murray Kafir from API and the Proptech Africa Association and Kalen for their strong support and assistance. I'd like to thank the 256 people who registered and participated in today's webinar. And I'd like to end by thanking most emphatically, I'd like to thank Teo, John, Will, and Jared for sharing nearly an hour and a half of your valued time and your wisdom and your learnings. It's very clear from the chat that your points have resonated with the property professionals who are on the call today. So I'd like to say thank you very much. And from a Proptech Association point of view, we will be hosting another webinar during the course of this year and many, many more events in the future. So I'd like to thank everybody and wish you all well, and I invite you to the next webinars and events in the months ahead. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Good.